In the annals of archaeology, there are Ning, Howard Carter and his Tutankhamun, Schliemann and his Troy. These are stories etched into legend, enshrined in textbooks, and reborn as Hollywood blockbusters. They speak of curses and of gold, of secrets unearthed after millennia. But there is another story, one shrouded not in a mystical curse, but in a profound, almost preternatural silence. It is the account of a discovery so monumental and so tragically forgotten that it has become the great archaeological enigma of the 20th century. This is the story of the French archaeologist Pierre Montet, and of a pharaoh who, by all scientific understanding, simply should not have existed. It is an investigative thriller centered on the mystery of the Silver Pharaoh. The early 20th century was an age of gold fever, but the prospectors sought tombs, not nuggets. The world was intoxicated, mesmerized by Egypt. Newspapers, the nascent industries of radio and cinema, all were consumed by a singular obsession with pharaohs, pyramids, and mummies. In 1922, Howard Carter's discovery of the boy king Tutankhamun's nearly intact tomb detonated was the cultural bedrock of the era. The world watched Carter's every move, transfixed by each artifact carried from the dark of the tomb into the light of day. Tutankhamun's golden mask became an icon, a symbol not only of ancient Egypt, but of human history itself. The legend of a pharaoh's curse, fanned into a global hysteria by the mysterious death of the expedition's sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, only added fuel to the fire. It seemed the ultimate secret had been revealed. What discovery could possibly be grander? The Valley of the Kings, a dry, sun-scoured canyon near Luxor, became an absolute mecca for archaeologists and adventurers, for journalists and tourists. Everyone believed that here, in this sacred royal necropolis, the earth held its most profound secrets. Everyone, except for one man. His name was Pierre Montet. A French archaeologist and professor, he was the complete antithesis of the media-savvy, theatrical Howard Carter. Montet was a man of quiet science, stubborn, meticulous, methodical, with no interest in chasing fleeting sensations. And while dozens of expeditions jostled for position in the south, his gaze was fixed elsewhere. He looked north, to the Nile Delta. It was a place most of his colleagues considered an archaeological quagmire, a hopeless swamp. The Delta was not the arid Viers. It was a land of moisture and marsh, a living, breathing earth where the great Nile perpetually reclaims its own. A place where the past was not preserved, but devoured. Before it empties into the Mediterranean Sea, the Gree channels. Here, the very soil is saturated, choked with water. For millennia, before the building of the Aswan Dam, the river's annual flood would wash away, destroy, and then bury whatever humanity had built beneath meters of fertile silt. Any first-year archaeology student will tell you, moisture is the absolute enemy. Here, wood turns to dust in a decade. Papyrus becomes a formless pulp. Mud brick simply dissolves, while stone foundations subside, crack, and are swallowed by the earth. To search for an untouched royal tomb in the floor of the ocean, it was considered more than a difficult task. It was considered madness. But Pierre Montet was not a madman. He was a scholarly detective who trusted not in rumor, but in the cold, hard facts locked away in ancient texts. Sacred scriptures, Egyptian chronicles, even the Bible, they all spoke of a great city in the Delta, a city named Tanis. It was the capital of Egypt during the 21st and 22nd dynasties, a period stretching from the 11th to the 8th century BCE. In official Egyptology, this span of time is known as the Third Intermediate Period. The name itself speaks volumes. It is an era many historians have scornfully dismissed as Egypt's Dark Ages, a time of political chaos when the unified state fractured into two. Pharaohs ruled from the Delta in the north, while the high priests of the god Amun, effectively independent theocrats, governed from Thebes in the south. It was an age marked by the invasion of Libyan tribes, a period thought to be one of total decline, impoverishment, and cultural decay. An epoch from which no one expected great architectural achievements, let alone untold treasures. Monte categorically disagreed. His logic was simple and ironclad. If Tanis was the capital, then pharaohs must have lived and died there. And if pharaohs died there, their tombs must be somewhere nearby. He was certain that beneath the unremarkable hills of Tanis, buried under layers of silt and total oblivion, lay the answers to the riddles of an entire era. He began his excavations in the late 1920s. For 10 years, season after season, his team dug slowly, methodically, inch by inch, into the unyielding earth of the Delta. The work was grueling and unrewarding. They uncovered the remnants of gigantic temple walls and the fragments of colossal statues of Ramesses the Great, but they soon understood the truth. The pharaohs of Tanis were divine recyclers. They had simply transported monuments from the more ancient capital of Ramesses, using them as a quarry for their new city. The finds were impressive, but they were echoes of a different age. They were a false trail, leading him no closer to the one thing he sought above all else: the lost royal necropolis. Funding from the Louvre had dwindled. Enthusiasm, once the lifeblood of the team, had all but evaporated. In the wider world of archaeology, colleagues offered only condescending shrugs, a silent chorus of, "We told you so." And then came the year 1939. The world was teetering on the edge of an abyss. A low rumble of impending war in Europe was swelling into a deafening roar. In September, Hitler's armies stormed Poland, unleashing the Second World War. Britain and France answered. It seemed all of humanity would soon have little time for the quiet secrets of ancient tombs. But here, in the Nile Delta, far from the political tempests and the scream of sirens, the only sounds were the whisper of palm leaves and the monotonous, hypnotic rhythm of pickaxes striking the earth. As if in another dimension, Pierre Monte's expedition carried on. Their focus had narrowed to the southwestern corner of the vast temple complex of the supreme god Amun at Tanis. And it was here, near the entrance to a ruined sanctuary, that the workmen's tools struck something unnaturally hard. They were the uppermost, perfectly fitted blocks of some unknown subterranean structure. A painstaking, agonizingly slow process of clearing began. Stone by stone, basketful by basketful of earth, they descended into the deep. Soon, the truth was undeniable. It was the entrance to a tomb. The hearts of archaeologists, worn down by years of fruitless searching, began to pound. But the first glance inside delivered a cold, crushing disappointment. The burial chamber was empty. On the floor lay the scattered debris of funerary offerings. On the walls, the telltale smudges of soot from the torches of ancient thieves. Another plundered tomb. A story repeated in the sands of Egypt thousands upon thousands of times. The team was for nothing. But Pierre Monte would not be the man he was if he surrendered so easily. While his assistant sat in dejected silence, he became a detective at the scene of a very old crime. Inch by inch, he scanned the walls of the empty chamber. His gaze, honed by decades in the field, his almost supernatural intuition, snagged on a single, infinitesimal detail. An anomaly. In one wall, tucked into the farthest corner, the masonry was imperceptibly different. The joints between the blocks were not quite the same. The mortar seemed to be of a different composition. It was as if this section of the wall had been constructed later than the rest, as if it were concealing something. To any other eye, it would have been a trick of the light, a figment of a desperate imagination. But for Monte, it was a clue. It was the one ghostly, almost irrational chance he had left. He gave the order. The workmen, their faith shattered, took up their tools with a visible reluctance and began dismantling the unremarkable wall. The heavy thud of crowbars against stone echoed, hollow and anxious, in the tight, airless space. An hour passed, then another. The wall seemed monolithic. And then, one of the stones gave way. It shifted with a deep groan. Beyond it lay a void, an opening of pure, pitch-black emptiness. The greatest treasures are not always found behind gates of gold, but behind walls of doubt. They lie in wait for the one mind that refuses to accept defeat, the one eye that can see a seam where others see only a solid, final end. The air that rushed to meet them was a physical presence, stale, heavy, and motionless, a breath held for 3,000 years. When the opening was finally wide enough for a man to pass, the archaeologist Pierre Monte, lantern in hand, was the first to step across the threshold into the darkness. In the unsteady dance of carbide lamps and electric torches, the impossible took form. They stood within a burial chamber, previously unknown to history, and it was utterly pristine. Directly before them loomed a massive sarcophagus of pink Aswan granite, its surface a silent testament of hieroglyphs. But it was not the granite that held their gaze. Beside it stood another form, forged from metal. It did not shine with the familiar solar warmth of gold. It gleamed with a cold, otherworldly light, a luster that seemed to drink the darkness. It was the color of the moon. It was silver. To fully comprehend the intellectual and emotional shock that seized Monte and his team is to unlearn everything we believe about wealth. Contrary to our modern conviction that gold is the ultimate measure of riches, in ancient Egypt, during certain periods of its long history, silver was valued far more, sometimes twice as much. Trade documents suggest at times even 10 times. The reason was a matter of geography and divinity. Gold, the flesh of the gods, was a relatively accessible resource, mined in vast quantities from the deserts of Nubia on the empire's southern frontier. Gold was local, but silver, the bones of the gods, was almost non-existent in the lands of the Nile. It was an exclusively imported metal, exotic, almost alien. It was brought from afar with immense risk and effort, from the mines of Anatolia and the islands of the Aegean Sea. To possess it required sophisticated trade routes, masterful diplomacy, and powerful connections to other great civilizations. To own silver in vast quantities was not merely to be rich, it was a statement of global power and international influence. And now, in this damp tomb, stood not a cup, not a bracelet, not a small statuette. Before them rested a whole, massive, full-sized sarcophagus, cast entirely from pure silver. Nothing of its kind had ever been unearthed in the history of Egyptology, not before and not since. It was a discovery that shattered all established beliefs about the pharaohs of the Third Intermediate Period, an era long dismissed as dark, impoverished, and decadent.
Turning back to the granite sarcophagus, they struggled in the flickering light to decipher the name carved into the stone. The name that emerged belonged to a king, Susenus I. The find was more than a treasure. It was a correction written in metal. It served as a profound reminder that our modern definitions of value are fleeting. In the silent darkness of the earth, truer measures of power and influence await, ready to rewrite all that we thought we knew. He was a ghost of the 21st dynasty, a pharaoh who ruled nearly 3,000 years ago. A sovereign about whom history knew almost nothing. A few fleeting mentions in temple chronicles, a pair of inscriptions on stone. His was a figure bordering on myth, a name lost to the shifting sands. And then, his tomb was found. Utterly, miraculously, untouched. For days, the team prepared to breach the sarcophagi, documenting their positions, capturing their silent majesty on film. The tension was a palpable thing, mounting with every hour. Beyond this small, isolated dig, the world was slowly, inexorably plunging into the abyss of war. But here, in a forgotten tomb buried deep in the Nile Delta, one of history's greatest discoveries was about to unfold. They began with the great rose granite sarcophagus of Susenus himself. With a system of levers, a team of 10 Egyptian workers strained, fighting for every inch, sliding the multi-ton lid aside. Inside lay a second sarcophagus, carved from black granite, its craftsmanship even more exquisite. And within that, a third, anthropomorphed entirely in gold foil. It was a classic Egyptian nesting doll, a series of sacred shells designed to grant a pharaoh the ultimate protection on his journey into eternity. When they opened this final coffin, they looked upon the mummy of Susenus. His face was obscured by a magnificent burial mask, hammered from pure sheet gold. But the greatest prize, and the deepest mystery, waited in a different coffin. A sarcophagus of solid silver. It did not belong to Susenus. Etched upon its surface was the name of another pharaoh, Shoshenq II, a ruler from the subsequent 22nd dynasty. How had he come to rest here, an intruder in the tomb of another king? It was yet another enigma. With immense effort, they raised the lid, weighing over 100 kilograms of pure silver. The archaeologists fell into a reverent silence. There, nestled among the decayed remnants of linen wrappings, lay treasures of an unearthly, impossible beauty. Magnificent falcon collar necklaces of gold and precious stones, intricate pectoral ornaments, and massive bracelets of gold and lapis lazuli. But beneath the splendor was a profound tragedy. The humidity of the ages had done its work. The mummy had almost completely disintegrated. Of the great ruler, only a blackened skeleton remained, draped in a king's ransom. Silver, unlike chemically inert gold, oxidizes. This slow, relentless process, combined with the damp climate of the delta, had consumed the pharaoh's organic remains. It was a moment of supreme scientific triumph and devastating human loss. They had found the treasure, but they had lost the man. The story, however, was not over. As the team cleared the chamber, they began to realize this was not merely the tomb of Susenus. It was a family crypt, a secret royal necropolis. The stone walls had guarded their secrets for millennia, preserving the ambition of kings in gleaming gold and precious gems, but they could not halt the quiet, inexorable decay of the flesh. The treasures speak of power, of a belief in immortality, yet the dust they lay upon tells a different, more universal story. A final, humbling surrender to the long march of time. It was a tomb within a tomb, cunningly concealed inside a more ancient, long-looted burial. Behind walls masked as solid rock lay chambers even more secret, where archaeologists uncovered the final resting places of other rulers and their kin. Here lay the pharaoh Amenemope, successor to Susenes, his own mummy resting in a stone sarcophagus, surrounded by a king's ransom in adornments. Here too was the prince, Ankhesenmut. And then, the most astonishing discovery of all, the burial of a non-royal, a high-ranking military commander and priest named Wenjabauenjed. He had been granted the unprecedented honor of being interred beside his sovereign lord, his grave goods nearly as magnificent, an exquisite golden bowl, silver statuettes, and weapons of inlaid artistry. This was not the discovery of a single crypt. It was the unearthing of an entire forgotten chapter of Egyptian history. An untouched time capsule that proved with blinding clarity that the Third Intermediate Period was no dark age of decline. It was a time of sophisticated art, of enormous, almost unthinkable wealth, and of complex international trade that brought silver into Egypt on an industrial scale. A kingdom wealthy enough to entomb its pharaohs in a metal that, for a time, was valued even more highly than gold. The culmination was the mummy of Susenes I himself. His solid gold mask, though smaller and less intricate than Tutankhamun's, was arresting. It bore a stern, powerful, uncompromising expression. The face not of a boy king, but of a mature and mighty ruler who had lived a long life. The mummy's fingers and toes were sheathed in perfectly wrought stalls of pure gold, preserving their form for eternity. Upon his chest lay dozens of necklaces and amulets of gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. Beside the body, golden vessels for ritual libations, daggers with golden hilts, the full royal regalia. In its staggering value, and more profoundly, its historical significance, the find at Tanis was entirely comparable to, if not greater than, the tomb of Tutankhamun. The archaeologist Pierre Montet had made the discovery of the century. He had found what no one believed existed. The world should have erupted with news of the Silver Pharaoh. Newspapers should have blazed with giant headlines. The name Susenes should have become as iconic as Tutankhamun. But here, history takes a sharp, brutal, and tragic turn. While Montet and his team, in a state of euphoria, catalogued their incredible finds, the drums of war were thundering across Europe. In May of 1940, just months after the greatest discoveries were made, Nazi Germany bypassed the Maginot Line. The golden treasures of a long-dead king had been brought into the light, only to be instantly eclipsed by the darkness of a world at war. A discovery that should have reshaped our understanding of the past was silenced by the roar of the present, a whisper of ancient wonder lost in the maelstrom of human conflict. As the swift invasion of France began, a nation was brought to its knees in a matter of weeks. Far away, on the sands of Egypt, all communication with the expedition was severed. The archaeologist Pierre Montet was forced into a desperate rush, shutting down his life's work to return to a homeland consumed by war, chaos, and the humiliation of occupation. He barely had time to arrange for his most precious finds to be shipped to Cairo. There, in the deep cellars of the Egyptian Museum, they were hidden away, shielded from the unpredictable fortunes of a world at war. News of his discovery did, of course, trickle into the narrow circles of academia. A few preliminary articles were published in French archaeological journals, but the world had no time for it. Consider for a moment the thunderous sensation that erupted from the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. The world was at peace. It was the roaring 20s, an age of jazz, the flourishing of cinema, the telegraph, a global press. Every artifact emerging from the Valley of the Kings became a worldwide headline that very same day. An entire cultural industry grew around Tutankhamun. Egyptian motifs swept through fashion, design, and architecture. Films were made, books were written. And what was happening in the world in 1940? The news was of frontline dispatches, the bombing of London, reports of millions of refugees and hundreds of thousands dead, the Battle of Britain. Against this apocalyptic backdrop, the story of some ancient pharaoh unearthed in the marshes of the Nile Delta was simply lost. It did not just fail to make the front pages, it went entirely unnoticed, drowned in a bottomless ocean of human pain, fear, and the suffering of the Second World War. Pierre Montet survived the conflict. After its end, in 1946, he published a thorough, foundational scientific report on his findings at Tanis. But the moment had been irrevocably lost. The world had changed beyond recognition. It lay in ruins, struggling to build a new life. The Cold War was dawning. The atomic race had begun. The public's fascination with ancient Egypt was no longer so sharp, so all-consuming. The sensation never came. The treasures of Susenes I remain today in the vitrines of the Cairo Museum, in Hall No. 2, forever in the shadow of the more famous, media-saturated golden mask of Tutankhamun, in Hall No. 3. Susenes I, a powerful ruler who concealed his tomb so ingeniously that it survived 3,000 years of plunderers and cataclysms. He was found, only to be immediately lost again, this time to the deafening roar of 20th century history. His posthumous fame, his very place in eternity, was stolen by a world war. And so, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century remains a secret. Known only to a small circle of specialists, it is the story of a brilliant scholar who defied the authorities, trusted his intuition, and won a stunning victory, only to have his triumph silenced by the clamor of a world tearing itself apart. It is a bitter lesson in the fragility of human memory, a testament to how even the most profound discoveries can be erased from our collective consciousness by the thunder of greater historical upheavals. And so, as we gaze upon the cold gleam of a silver sarcophagus into the severe golden face of Susenes, we are left with new, even deeper questions. What else lies hidden beneath the damp, fertile earth of the Nile Delta? A vast, almost entirely unexplored archaeological terra incognita. How many more inviolate tombs, how many forgotten pharaohs lie waiting for their moment? Buried under millennia of silt, entombed beneath the foundations of modern cities and villages. It forces a question that is almost philosophical in its scope. Had it not been for the shadow of the Second World War, how different would our vision of ancient Egypt be today? Perhaps the great caravans of tourism would journey not to the searing heat of the Valley of the Kings, but to the quiet town of San el-Hagar, the ancient city of Tanis. Perhaps the ultimate symbol of that eternal civilization would not be a mask of gold, but one of silver. The face of a pharaoh who was found, only to be lost again, not to the sands of the desert, but to the clamor of a world at war. A silver king reigning over a silent kingdom of what might have been.